One good performance is a coincidence, two good performances is form, but when you perform for a month and a half straight, you've almost certainly done something different to really level yourself up as a rider. Throughout the start of the season, there's been a host of breakthroughs and surprising rides, but none have quite surprised me to the level of Laurens Sweeck. So I'm not going to beat around the bush. I've been harsh on Sweeck in the past. I always felt like he was clearly the third best at Paulshausen, and I honestly never really saw him as one of the leading crossers alongside Iserbyt and Van Turenhout. To me, he was honestly just sort of the best of the rest, a guarantee for the top 10, but not really a favourite to podium a World Cup. Sure, he had his good days, but he also had quite a lot of bad days. So when he announced he was leaving Paulshausen, I thought, it's a good deal for both parties. He gets more freedom and Paulshausen don't really lose anything, and they've got youngsters coming through that should well be able to fill that gap. However, over the past month and a bit, I've been proven incredibly wrong. Sweeck started off his career pretty much where he is now, riding for a team owned by the Roodhoofd brothers. Back then it was Corendon, the team that would later grow into today's Alpecin Koning. He's part of that weird, massive generation of Belgians that just sort of appeared in the wake of Van Aert and Van der Poel, alongside the likes of Michael van Turenhout, the Aerts brothers, Tim Merlier, Johnny Vermeers, Quinten Hermans, and so forth. Sweeck was immediately one of the more successful of that gang, alongside initially Aerts and Van Turenhout, even winning a trophy round in his debut season at Sint Niklaas. He also finished second at the Belgian Nationals behind Wout van Aert. He was definitely proving himself to have some pretty good ability. Strangely, Laurens would start to plateau a little during the next few years. He'd podium the Nationals and win the odd smaller race, but never a big one, and I really can't think of a single reason why. Absolutely none at all come to mind. At the start of 2018, Sweeck would join the Paulshausen Vastgoedservice team, filling the space vacated by Wout van Aert leaving for Jumbo-Visma. Sweeck would be the team's main leader, riding alongside the likes of Jens Adams, Daan Soete, Michael Boros and Julien Taramarca. Florian Vermeers was also apparently part of this team. Unfortunately, Sweeck's sole leadership wouldn't last very long. Financial troubles saw Paulshausen join forces with Marlux Bingo the following year. They created the now very well known Paulshausen Bingo team, the team we all know and sort of tolerate today. Sweeck was suddenly teammates with Michael van Turenhout and an up-and-coming youngster called Adi Iserbyt. During the start of this trifecta, things seemed to be going pretty decently. Iserbyt quickly established himself as the strongest, but Laurens still had a look in. He won a first Super Prestige round in Middelkerke, and his consistency afforded him the overall title as well. He'd also crowned himself as Belgian champion in Antwerp. Over the next few years though, at Paulshausen, Sweeck would slowly fade to the background, effectively becoming a third fiddle to Van Turenhout and Iserbyt, no longer really at the same level as them. In 2020-2021, he'd still have a few decent wins, especially towards the back end of the season, but last year especially, I thought Sweeck seemed to be pretty tame compared to what was expected. His one big victory came in Hammer, the penultimate big cross of the season, and the last weekend before the World Championships, where a handful of people chose not to race or focus on Hoge Heide the day after. Not that I know him personally, but over the past few years he's always struck me as a bit of a sort of dour bloke, and maybe that was true, because last year Sweeck announced he'd be leaving Paulshausen, eventually finding shelter back at the Roodhoofds at Crelan Frieslands, and my god has he looked rejuvenated. Since the start of the season, Sweeck has finished no lower than 4th, a feat only equalled by Lars van der Haar. In Fayetteville he came closer than ever to claiming his first elusive World Cup victory. No 2 weeks later in Maasmechelen, he dominantly made it reality, and from that moment on, it looks like there's a weight off of his rather large shoulders. At the Euros, he rode an inspired performance to finish third on a course that is the polar opposite of his skill set, before last week he came out on top in both Niel and at that brilliant battle at the Beekse Bergen. It just goes to show how vital a positive working environment can be. Sweeck looks completely different. He looks a completely different person to last year, and frankly I'm having to eat a lot of words I said 12 months ago. I'm curious to see what will happen with first Pidcock and then Van Aert and Van der Poel coming back into cross. The last few years we've seen Iserbyt dominate and start strong, but start to falter towards the time the big boys came to play. This year his form has dipped too, admittedly aggravated by an injury, but suddenly Sweeck is amongst this group of riders who seem to have completely caught up to his level. I suppose we'll see in the coming weeks precisely if any of them have gotten any closer to the big three over the course of a year, and secretly, I am more hopeful than I usually am. I frankly don't see anybody beating Van der Poel or Van Aert, but I do think that Sweeck especially will be much closer than he was in the past. Maybe on the perfect day, on the perfect course, he could put up a fight. So, what do you think? Do you think the level of Sweeck and to an extent Van der Haar has risen this season? Or do you think that Iserbyt has fallen back a bit? Where do you think they'll stack up compared to the big boys? Will it be as dominant as last season? Or will there at least be some competition? Feel free to comment below. I promise I'll try and get around to some more informational and factional videos ASAP. I've been ill all week, as you can probably hear. Everything's gone a bit wrong. If you enjoyed the sport, if you want to hear more, feel free to subscribe, and I'm sure some more will drop somewhere soon. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.